Hello, these are the words for the wind for the second Sunday of Lent 2021, the last weekend of February. A year ago, this corresponding weekend was the last normal weekend at church. As this coming week last year unfolded, things changed very fast and things were very different. But anyway, the readings for today are troubling to me. The readings today on the surface seem to fit together nicely. They conform a narrative that developed in the church. Was probably always there, not at the beginning, but, well, maybe. But it was a notion of atonement, that God wanted Jesus to die for our sins, that somehow God got really ticked off with Adam and Eve in one afternoon and then went into this whole long unhappy period of pouting, and then finally decided, well, okay, the way we'll take care of this is I'll incarnate myself in my son, and then he'll die, and then I'll be happy. And so the first reading is the very troubling reading about God wanting Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, which is a very disturbing reading. And if you take it literally, it's a very monstrous God. No God that I want to believe in, and certainly no God that Jesus Christ had anything to do with, would have proposed such a thing. At best, that particular passage was a passage to try and prohibit the sacrifice of children by parents, which had become, infanticide is what it was called, infanticide had become a sacrificial ritual, in a disturbing way that I'll try and explain in the homily. The second reading is an epistle letter that kind of confirms the fact that God wanted Jesus to die for our sins. And then the gospel story, though, from Mark, tells us that 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a mountain, is transfigured before them. His garments became dazzlingly white, whiter than any bleach could make them. And then he appears with Moses and Elijah, and Peter says, well, golly, it's great for us to be here. Let's build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And then Mark tells us that Peter really didn't know what he was saying. And then a cloud comes and kind of encompasses them, a shadow, it says, and the voice says, this is my beloved son, listen to him, listen to him. And then when the shadow goes away, it's only Jesus, and they go down the mountain. Jesus says, don't talk about this yet until the Son of Man rises from the dead. And then the passage ends with, they didn't talk about it, but they did talk about what it meant to rise from the dead. So here's how I talked about it in the homilies today. Beginning a year ago, with tons of time on my hand, I would fool around with my phone or with my computer. And by the summertime, I noticed that I had lost a lot of my most important or favorite videos and pictures of trips and people and places and things that happened at Maria Goretti and so on. They were gone, and I would try different ways to get them back, but didn't. And then by the time we get to early December or Thanksgiving time, my iPhone wasn't working. The battery was gone, and you had to keep charging it all the time, and it was not getting phone calls and voicemail messages in a timely manner. And so I got a new iPhone. And then about the middle of February, I noticed, because my screensaver on my computer are pictures from my iPhone, I noticed pictures that I thought were lost began appearing in the slideshows of the screensaver. And so I spent some time in the last week looking, and I found very wonderful pictures and little videos, treasured videos. And one of my favorite videos is this. I was lucky enough to be in Paris to celebrate my 70th birthday with young friends of mine, and we went to lunch one day, and I um, wanted to have a special lunch, and I wanted to have champagne. They had never had champagne before, and so I ordered champagne, Paul Roger, and the waiter served the champagne, poured the champagne, and then when it was time for the toast, I got my camera out, and I wanted to take a picture, a video of one of my young friends when he tasted champagne for the first time, and it's just this wonderful image of, you know, surprise and pleasure and amazement and all the things that go with that wonderful bubbling on your palate and on your tongue and so on. And then we had special desserts, and I did the same thing with the desserts, and it was just delicious to watch them eat the desserts and pick up the plates and lick them, you know, like little kids in high chairs. It was just awesome. So those were my things. Well, then that leads me to tell you about champagne. The only place in the world that legally can say they have champagne is from Reims, France, which is just outside of Paris. And Reims has a cathedral, a great Gothic cathedral, and it's the only one of the great Gothic cathedrals that has as much detail on the inside of the front wall as it does on the outside of the front wall. I'm not sure why that's the case, but I was lucky enough to be in Reims one January in a blizzard, in that cathedral in a blizzard. The snow was coming down by the foot, and the wind was howling outside. There was very few other people in the cathedral. It was just a great experience. And in Reims Cathedral, it's one of the tallest, the highest. The pillars go way up, and on the capitals of the pillars, the stonemasons carved in leaves of every tree they believed to be growing in France at the turn of the first millennium. And the reason they did that is because the earliest places that were sacred to our ancestors, our European ancestors, were groves of trees. The oak tree had a particular significance because of how long it took to grow, how tall it would get, and how strong it was. And so what the significance was that the grove would provide places for the acorns to seed, because the initial understanding of sacred had to do with fertility and flourishing. And so sacred places were places where there was fertility and flourishing. I've told you before, I think, that the oldest images of sacred personages were images of pregnant women, because the womb was a sacred place. It was a place of fertility and fruitfulness. So that was pretty important to me to think about. What happened as time went on, gradually, and we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago, somehow our ancestors got the idea that they could make places sacred. That's where the word sacrifice comes from, that we could make places sacred. And what they decided in a very distorted way, and there's theories why, it had to do with men feeling competitive and inferior to other men. What made for a sacrifice was holy killing, murder, killing victims. Initially, it was human victims. That's why that first reading where God tells Abraham to kill Isaac is a corrective to that, because then in that story, God sends an angel to stop Abraham before he can kill Isaac. That was the corrective, that in the Hebrew revelation of the Hebrew belief in God, infant sacrifice was not to be tolerated. The Hebrews, the Jewish people, had two temples. The first temple was about fruitfulness and fertility. Then that got destroyed, and the Jews were taken into captivity. When they came back, again, probably feeling inferior, insecure in their identity, They resorted again to sacrifice, but not of humans, but of animals. That's why in the Gospels, the Gospel writers have Jesus overturn the money changers and let the animals go free. And that's part of the theology of why Jesus dies. But it's not because God wanted him. If you pay attention to the actual texts and not the assumptions and not all the times we were told that Jesus died for our sins and we should get weepy and make up for that because, whatever we did, Jesus died for. If you read the actual texts, Jesus is the one that calls all the shots. When he's taken into captivity, he steps forward and he says, I am he. Here am I. Here am I. Let these people go. You take me. Because what Jesus tried to do was subvert, first of all, the idea that killing, that sacred killing, was something that was pleasing to God. Secondly, that there was no reason for anyone to feel inferior to anyone else if they really understood that God loved them. That's why when he taught people to pray, he said, you pray, our Father. He made a collective relationship for all people. Our Father who art in heaven. That's all of us. None of us should feel inferior. I know we do, but we can work on that. That was what the Paschal Mystery was, that we die to those false notions of ourselves as being inferior or less than, that we are all so prone to doing, operating out of our feelings of inferiority rather than operating out of our feelings of belovedness. And so in the gospel today, Jesus appears with Moses and Elijah. Well, if you go back and read the stories of Moses and Elijah, you will see that both of them are murderers. Moses killed a Egyptian soldier, and Elijah, in a competition with the so-called pagan god of Baal, Baal, wins, and then because he won, he gets to kill all these priests of Baal. And what that story, Mark, is a corrective, because the voice that comes from the cloud says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. Don't listen to the false notions of wisdom. Don't listen to the inner demons that speak to you, and I don't mean little horned creatures, but I mean our own shadows that speak to us and say, oh, I'm inferior, and if I get rid of so-and-so, I'll be okay. If I get rid of so-and-so. We've structured so many systems, so many human systems on the basis of eliminating other people. And you would think that by the 21st century, we might have gotten over that, but we haven't, because many ways we've constructed our systems and relationships as completely competitive. And so we want to win, or we want to have something that someone else cannot have. That's what drives American politics today, is this competitive understanding about who has what. And there are groups of people that think, well, if people have what we have, then we have nothing. And that's not what the gospel teaches. And that's hard to get our heads around, because so many systems and so many assumptions are built that way, or we built that way, and they continue to reinforce that. I mean, the way we just had kids for First Communion, families last Sunday and this Sunday that are supposed to make their First Communion this year, and one little boy told me he loved video games, but he's not very good at them. And I said, I'm glad you're not very good at video games, because video games just reinforce at an early age those structures of competitive relationship, whereas what Jesus tried to do is tell us that we are all related and that we are all belong to a loving God and we are all beloved. That's hard to handle. This is getting too long. We're almost at 15 minutes. So what I would suggest to you is go back to the experiences in your life where you were dazzled by something. The first time you had champagne, maybe, or the first time you kissed your lover, the first time your baby ate sugar, whatever it is. Think of sweet things and good things and amazing things in your life. Peace be with you.